Hi all, welcome to another episode of Saturday Architecture. We're kind of trying to talk about the Log4J, which is like literally burning the internet, right? And it is a storm which has gone unabated for a couple of weeks, and I think it will keep on going for months. And Deepak had some interesting things to share on this. And all of us know pretty much, so I'm not going to get into details of what Log4J is or how it's going to be fixed, but more from an architecture perspective, I'm acknowledging that issues like this can always happen. We cannot do anything about it. Okay. We can't do anything about the issue happening, right? But if it happens, what is the resilience that we can build in is what I was thinking. What is it that we can do as architects? So I don't use any of this, but then what I did, for example, is had a quick discussion with my team and kind of asked them, okay, if something like this happens, what is it that we can do for the environment, that tech stack that I'm using? It's a combination of MySQL, Laravel, PHP, React.js kind of a thing. And one basic thing, of course, we came up with this: an attack has happened. So can I restore and get back to my original thing? So that's the first check which I asked them. And that's the first thing which I kind of check. Are my backups and recovery working? Fundamental, right? If something happens, how quickly can my restore my set? What will be my recovery time objective, recovery point objective? And I asked my team, guys, just keep testing it. Every time we have to keep checking that. Now, this sounds very simple, but in my 25 years, I have seen many corporate production systems seriously going down because the backup could not be restored. People do take backups, but they never say the health of the backup, right? And that is actually a serious problem. I will take a bet 40% of the backups taken won't restore when you try to do it. Okay. Now it is your fate whether it was your last backup or the one before that. Okay. Or the one before that which is failing. Okay. So that I'm sure Deepak, who has been in operations and consulting, probably his percentage will be more. So do you stick to 30 or will you increase it? I'm not going to ask, will it be lesser?
30? So the one before I start answering, do you want to set up your lighting? I think your background seems to be shaking something.
Oh, that one. It's okay.
Okay. Usually you reset your lighting before you start recording. That's what I wanted to check.
Okay. I did. Something is a little different now.
Okay.
So basically, one thing which I said is check your backups and let it be all right. That is one. And second, the modules that we are using, okay, how tightly is it coupled with that? So for example, here, just check that one more time. Okay, I will live without logging for the next 3 months. How is it going to, how bad is it going? Because if I switch on logging, I might, like some other part of my functionality might break, right? We are ingenious in doing, right? So there is a logging that will happen. Some reporting tool, right, will actually work on log for business functionality, right? Am I kind of have done things like that? So that's another thing which I wanted to check. Each framework or each component is contained. So in a sense, it's like a microservice. Am I following the true principle of a microservice or a component, right? Is it isolated? So there's those 4 components. There. Is it autonomous? Is it testable kind of things, right? Those attributes at each level, is it there? So that's something which I kind of went through with my team. It is about checking how clean that encapsulation is, and it goes back to the old Java world, right? Object oriented world, nothing new here, but getting back to the basics and ensuring that we are good with respect to that. That's what I did with my team. I was curious to see what else thoughts comes to all of you. How else would you handle this? It's a given that this will happen, but how do you handle it nightly and neatly?
The real programmer should answer before I answer.
Yeah, and why Deepak doesn't call himself a real programmer is he's an architect, but he's more actively in the operation side of things, right? Development happens in production, scaling. He's an ITIL certified cloud operations, efficiency, adoption. A lot of time he spends on that side, right? Post development, right? That is a very big piece. And usually people who are in development actually are not aware of that world. It is like development and then job is done, right? I'll go home. Whether user adoption, how successful it in using, it is not just technical success, it is success of the business solution, right? So that's another thing. So Jiffin, Nitin, your thoughts on what we were talking? Shiva, you can tell from a Python world also, it's fine.
Sure, Kumaran, if I have anything in my mind.
Okay, Jiffin, any thoughts?
Yeah, of course. I remember when we started learning Hibernate. So one of the idea behind was like we can switch the database very easily. Okay, so I was trying to think like, okay, for if suddenly, as Kumaran mentioned, if I want to stop using, for example, Log4J from today onwards until we get a solution, other than switching off, is there any other options? Because most of the cases, when it comes to the development, people would be developing specific to that particular library or particular software, right? So I think that's the dangerous. I mean, we were, I remember like whenever we start the project, we'll try to identify or confirm the list of libraries that to be used. Once that is finalized, then assumption is we are going to survey with this, no other options. Now it's more like changing the library whenever we required. So I think that might need an additional layer to bring that abstraction. Otherwise, it would be very hard. But yeah, microservice definitely would give some advantage. But I think that will not solve the problem until we try to bring an abstraction layer.
So doesn't, just taking that point, right? When we start looking at APIs, doesn't, if you use an API, doesn't that abstract out the library or the technology behind it by default, if you do this properly?
APIs, yes, it could be. I remember, I mean, even, yeah, when we started, like, of course, library versus API.
No, don't look, okay, just to clarify, right? Don't think API as just a pure HTTP request, right? In the Windows world, okay, API is a terminology that's been used from 1980s, actually. Okay, Windows SDK were called APIs. Okay, it is application programming interface. It need not be HTTP. Okay, a call within the system, right, can be an API. Okay, it can be a DCOM, it can be a TCP/IP call. All are APIs only. It need not be HTTP, but an API in a true sense. The problem is probably when you call something in the OS, right? That is still an API. It is, you're asking the OS, the application is asking to do something. Okay, so technically speaking, that should have been OPI, operating system programmable interface, instead of calling it API. So in a way, that was a misnomer. Okay, but let's assume an interface was done cleanly, like for graphics, right? I had something like display. So there were a lot of things like draw screen is one function. Okay, now we would actually do window handle draw action, but then that's too specific to Windows. Probably if it was something like object/draw. Now it could be in Windows, in Mac OS, you can do it differently, which is interestingly, Java's claim to fame was that, right? Write once, run anywhere. But I don't think it ran anywhere than the intended thing. If you wrote code for JBoss, it will only run on JBoss. It won't even run on another Java server. Okay, so that is how, for whatever reason, it happened like that. But I think I'm getting what I was telling is, if we got the API right, or the interface right, the dependency of the library will come down, is what I'm suggesting.
That's correct. That's correct. Yeah. For example, if you have an abstract for the logger, so we just call that logger API. Behind the scene could be anything. Yeah.
So if I kind of get it, what you're, in a way, what you're trying to say is, let us go ahead and look in the code how much of abstraction is built in, or a layer of abstraction, or is it, or the different libraries and other things coupled with each other. Given that till I die, I will use Log4j or Hibernate. Is that kind of till death do us apart? You are the library that I will use. Is something like that there in the code? Yeah. Okay. Got it.
Probably these people, like for example database or logger, or could be the backend, the major supporting players used to get changed based on the needs. So then that time the program should not get affected.
Okay.
So definitely the logic, business logic, and the other supporting libraries or functions should be definitely separated out. And even to the developers, we should set the background. Don't believe, or don't by default don't think that you are going to use this for so and so.
Forever.
So any given point of time, any library should be updated, say within a week or so. That should be kind of a goal that should set to every programmer, so that automatically if any design fault, people would asking that question. Are we so the contract, right? When we call API, it's like I don't know the person who sits behind that API. Most of the cases people write the code because I know that person, because he's, even though he's in a different team, we work together, we know what's the logic he's going to do. So there is a chance that we are writing. So ideally, yeah, API brings that abstraction, but there is a context, like people, even usually we say that when you use an API, use the document and write it, right? But people never follow that. People ask that person and write the code here. Okay, so that could be some possibilities of violations. Okay, so we should, yeah, that's correct thing. So we should have some abstraction layer and set the mindset like you have very limited time when to change something.
Nitin, you have any ideas, thoughts?
Yes, I was actually thinking similar to what Jason told. Like we can
the sound is completely breaking.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can you
hear me?
Are you using AirPods?
It's AirPods. Yeah.
That is a problem. AirPods don't work well with Zoom.
Or you can just choose a different mic.
Use the laptop mic. Yeah.
I mean, use the headphone for speaker,
listening,
but microphone you can use the laptops thing. I think that will.
Or iPad, whatever you're using. Yeah. I think you can select it.
Very good. Yeah.
Okay, I was thinking what like similar to what Jason told, like we could make use of something similar to a SLF4J, that is an abstraction over all the logging frameworks available. We can actually, it is easy to switch between these sort of frameworks when an issue comes, right?
Yeah, and I think only thing we might have to take caution is it has to be a very thin abstraction layer. Otherwise, we will start. I've seen people doing this, right? You know, we want generic thing, and then on top of that existing thing, they will put another layer. And in that layer, they will write code which is specific to this framework. Okay, I've seen that mistake happening. You know, I don't want Log4j, but they will do telling that, you know, I'm from Tiny Magic. I want something specific for Tiny Magic. I will add it on top of that, such that I don't have to depend on Log4. But that layer will have dependencies. So in a way, my application code is not dependent on Log4j, but this layer again, so I think it's very important to have it very thin. It's more like a pass-through. The code should not be, I mean, like more code, more testing, maintenance, right? I think adding that abstraction layer is, but sometimes it might like, maybe that layer will be so stupid. Take one parameter and just call that exact function there. So there is nothing testing to be done. 3 parameters came, I gave 3 parameters. Whatever I got return, I will return it here. That's all it's there. A very thin, simple layer, but it gives you like insurance, but you pay very little premium for it. Like term insurance versus endowment policy, right? Term insurance, you take insurance, you die, you will get some return, otherwise you won't get anything. So it's more like a term insurance. Endowment is like, you will get a lot of returns also. So probably we need to take term insurance for this, is what I kind of get from what Jiffin was actually telling.
Just one more thought, like if any particular logging framework has a powerful feature in that, like if you're going with this sort of abstraction, we won't be actually able to use those sort of features, right?
Okay, so that's a good question. My understanding is you will still use that same function, that powerful feature you will use. Okay, but because you have an abstraction layer in between, let's say there are 5 functions within the framework. Okay, the feature that you are telling is the 5th function. That 5th function, I will say return true when I discover a vulnerability. 1, 2, 3, 4 will still be used. Okay, so from an application perspective, that feature which is causing a problem, I can switch off. If I didn't have an abstraction layer, now I have to tell the developers, go and look at all the places where you called function 5 and go comment it. So it is not adding the abstraction doesn't mean cutting out the lower functionality. I'm just it's like a pass through. If there are 10 functions in the framework, my abstraction layer also will have 10 functions. But it is just that the 10 gives me a play later. Now, if I want to switch it to some other framework, I will switch to some other framework and get all the 10 functions again. So the application won't have a problem. That's what we are talking about. So that way, you won't lose any functionality on day 1. But on the day you discover a problem, let's say function 3 is a problem, I will just say return true always. So the code which is running won't function properly, but the code itself won't break or it won't be bad. It won't function well, but it won't break. That's the safety.
Let me add 2 concepts to what you just explained, right? So what you explained is what I would say is a circuit breaker kind of example, where this is electrical, right? So in your house, you have, let's say, 4 rooms, different phases, right? So you go to your switchboard, where all your MCBs are there, right? So for each circuit, they will have these miniature circuit breakers, right? So if there is some electrical appliance plugged into some room, it goes bad, right? That circuit breaker will go off, right? It still does not bring the whole house down, right? So that it isolates itself. This is okay. That room is not available, but rest of the house is still available, right?
On a side note, just one very interesting thing happened when I was I was in 9th, I think. Okay. So my dad had got some toy and I'm the guy who will always rip things apart, right? Literally waiting for it to break. So I broke it down. Okay. So there's a DC motor was there, the small one, right? So gave battery and then it will drive faster. Okay. So I tried to do something it was doing. Then I thought, small battery, I give power, it will do so fast. No, if I give 240 volts, it will run even more faster. Okay. So I remember taking it and giving it, right? The whole house dumb. The whole house went up, right? And then I kept quiet because my dad was doing something serious. Okay. And the entire house fuse broke. So, and it was like, this was in the 80s. So apartment, literally and it was like that entire thing broke. It's not just my house. The entire apartment went down. Okay, so and this is the main circuit board. They had to call the electrician, switch off the main power, build that main fuse kind of a thing, right? That was those days. So something like me bought down the entire apartment, literally. Okay, until now I haven't told it. Okay, but now when you thought MCBs, I said how far we have come.
Yeah. And you see, again, this concept is the other concept, which is what is called the graceful failure, which is basically how the customer should experience failure, right? Where he says, okay, we are not shutting this, like one room becomes unavailable for electricity, but rest of the house is still operations, right? So that is, if your program simply shuts down if Log4j has to be taken out, right? that means this is not clean code, right? I think there is a Martin Fowler or somebody, I don't know who's Uncle Bob or something. There is a, if you go to YouTube, you'll find this thing. It says clean code. There's a famous guy who's part of the whole agile movement and everything. So he's written a lot of these books about how to write clean code, and it's a lot of YouTube videos also. And there he talks about all these things about how you should keep your code clean and the separation of concerns and all those things. Okay. Now, what I feel is happening with Log4j is now is the smoke test for all your programming or whatever has been implemented across the world. So now the question is, it is going to bring out those things of bad architecture, right? How badly the things were designed. Because if you had good architecture, it will be quicker to fix, like what Jiffin just explained, right? If you had that abstraction, not a big problem. You take that thing out, put something else in, or just shut it down. It is easy to fix, right? At least the vulnerability is reduced, right? Right now, the test, what needs to be seen is how many people are able to do that, and how many people are actually going to, because this exploit is in the wild now, right? This exploit is in the wild now. Now what you have to see is how many people are able to fix it in real time, right? So that is my sort of take on the Log4j, is just understanding how well it is designed, or how well it is architected.
So it's actually that's an interesting thing, Deepak. I think one thing we can say is how good is my architecture, right? It is not just, probably you had good design, but it was poor architecture. So Log4j problems is not a poor design thing; it's a poor architecture thing, right? I think it is a great test case for poor architecture. So I think it's kind of interesting. I never quite thought of it that way, but I think Log4j exposes weakness in architecture, not in design. Because using Log4j is a good design, but it's poor architecture, directly rather. Okay.
Yeah.
So
I think even if somebody used Log4j, now the question is how quickly they are able to fix it. Even today, right now, I was just reading, like few hours ago, whatever the fixes have been released, they have their own problems now. Right? So, and the whole issue is that Log4j is written by one person on voluntary basis. He's not even paid for writing that, right? It's an open source thing, right? And now you can imagine how much of world's infrastructure is sitting on top of that, right? So there's a cartoon which actually shows that you have all these complex pieces of infrastructure, and there is one small piece which is holding it up, right? and you know, that the funny thing in this case,
and amusingly, in the corporate world, right, you can't have anybody to blame. There is no fall guy here. Because you don't have any vendor or anybody to.
Earlier it used to be Microsoft, right? Earlier it used to be Microsoft. Now it is okay. Some guy who doesn't even get paid for writing this thing, he's written it. Now he's supposed to write the fix also, right? so there is the irony of the situation.
So how much of your Jiffin, are you personally, do you have to had your team anything you got working on fixes or this thing, or is it like your other neighborhood teams are doing it? I'm just curious. Well, I don't have Java in my environment. So neither even the native apps, right? Mobile apps are not Java based. So I don't have that scenario. I'm just curious.
Yeah, I think they're working on it.
Okay.
We were working on a product, so the recent product yet to go live, so we don't have a risk there.
Okay, but I think, but it is definitely, I think, sleepless nights and extreme.
Yeah. But I remember in my previous project they were using this abstraction. They were like the logger class name was something like the product name, like X logger.
Okay.
So
that's good.
So yeah, so
that much of abstraction will be there,
because they for the data analysis purpose they used to add so many parameters into the log, So people do not bother about it. So it's like a common
So
adding
that is the nuance there.
parameters from the common
They've
place.
added meta analysis purpose, right? Now, if there's another business critical functionality dependent on that data, you won't be able to comment out this layer. The layer still becomes
that's
critical. I think that I don't know how critical that data was, but if it is, then you have
That's
to take
correct, that's
additional
correct.
care. So
Yeah.
it's
So I remember there was a check, like for example, for each microservices, there was an additional check, like the outside calls making from that particular service.
okay.
Because each service, there was a list of
the third party, like who is a third party clients trying to use it? Oh, okay. So it could be for billing or anything like that, right? Or
it could
just
be
analysis.
So for example, if my service is expected to connect to 2 external parties, or expected to receive call from 3 external parties, that's a fixed count, right? Okay. So something goes, if the numbers are changing, obviously the log monitor will alarm it in terms of connectivity. So we actually did it for not for extra count, but it's for to ensure that we are getting the connectivity issues, checking with the problems with the third parties. Okay.
Got it.
So my thought was like, for every microservice that I own, okay, I should know the calls expected to go out and come in. Okay, so people should keep monitoring that. I mean, if any extra calls, somebody, any foreign party is trying to consume then or I try to connect to any foreign party, then that should get alarmed.
Got it. Super. Yeah. Okay, I think that was a good discussion. Thanks all for joining. We will keep discussing and keep connecting a fortnight from now.